Okay, so this video will be presenting to us on how do we write a learning objective. And so we'll try to understand what is a learning objective and how do we write it. Right now, you will be preparing to be teaching a session to develop a lesson plan. And one of the important place where you start is writing an objective, a learning objective. So we'll have to see how do you write a learning objective and what kind of components should a learning objective has. So let me begin by sharing for us a sample learning objective, the objective that I would have for this session. So as you can see, I have three objectives for this session. So the first session is by the end of the class, the students would explain the need for an objective. By the end of class, the students would explain the need for an objective. Why do we need a learning objective? The second one is by the end of the class, the students will be able to list the three component parts of a good objective. And the third objective I have is by the end of the class, the students would write an objective that has all three objectives, all three components. That should actually be saying components. So let me point out, I'll discuss it shortly, but let me point out some important things I want you to notice. I want you to notice this one. So when is it that I want you to be able to do whatever I want to do? The first one is, you can see it says by the end of the class, and it is repeated in all of them. When is it that I want you to do the activity that I want you to do? The behavior, the skill that I want you to do, the knowledge I want you to get. When is it that I want you to get those ones? You can see this one is by the end of the class, by the end of class, by the end of class. So by the end of the class, I expect you to be able to do it. I expect the students to be able to do something. And another thing I want you, the next one I want you to notice is what is it that I want you to do? This will be the important verbs that we have. In this case, it is to explain. Okay, I'm marking the wrong place. What I want you to do in the first objective is the activity, the performance I expect from you is be able to explain the need for an objective, the need for an objective. And in the second one, what do I want you to do? By the end of class, I want the students to be able to do something. What is it I want you to do? I'm not seeing my point. Let me change it. But just know that I'm talking about the same thing. So what is it that I want you to do here is I want you to list. The verb is list, and here the verb is explain. Okay, what I want you to do here is be able to explain. Here it is to list. On the third one, by the end of the class, the students would write. It is for them to be able to write. I'm not seeing my thing again. Okay, up there. It is to write. So by the end of class, I want you to write. So we have these three verbs. In the first one, explain. In the second one, it says list. And in the last one, it is to write. So these are important for you to remember. Okay, your objective has to have those important verbs which will demonstrate what you want them to be able to do. Okay, so list alle, explain alle, and then we have the activity, the writing. Another one that I would like us to notice is, which I don't necessarily have in the first one, but in the third one we have this one here. Okay, it has three components. How many of them do I want my students to list? I want them to list three component parts of it. In the third objective, I want you to write a learning objective, but then I want you to write a learning objective that has all three objectives, okay, all three component parts. So these things are important. So we have by the end of class, and then we have what I want you to be able to do by the end of class, that is to explain, to list, or to write. And in listing, I want you to list all three. And in writing, I want you to not just write an objective, but I want you to write an objective that has all three components. Okay, so that's for you to just get. But then let's move on now. So those are my three objectives by the end of this session. So intended learning outcomes, different names go with it. Different people use different words for it, but basically the same idea. It is what you want to achieve. Okay, it's what you want to achieve by the end of the session, by the end of the lesson that you have. So it could be called intended learning outcomes, performance-based learning outcomes, instructional objectives, and many more. Instructional objectives are written for the student, and they state what the student is expected to do following instruction. So whenever we write an objective, this is very important for us to grasp. Whenever we write an objective, we write it for the student in terms of what you expect the student to be able to do. It should never be written in terms of what you as a teacher want to do. I will teach the three components parts of an objective. No. Instead, you'll be saying the students will learn the three component parts of an objective. Okay, so whenever it is written, it should be written in view of the student. When it is stated, it should be stated with the student at the center of it. It's never about the teacher. Because sometimes we make that mistake. What's your objective today? My objective today is to do this, to do this. I want to do this. But that's not it. It's not about what you will be doing, but learning objectives should be written in terms of what you want the students to learn. It should be in terms of what the students will grasp, what they will understand, what they will be able to do. So it's about the students. They are most specific expected outcomes with criteria and measurement of performance. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I would have asked you in class, we would have discussed about, okay, what would be the objectives, benefits of it? Why do we need an objective? And there will be many benefits of it that you will be able to raise. You can think about it for a minute. Okay, why do I need to write an objective? Why is it important? And then if you begin to think about it, you actually realize you should never go into a classroom without having an objective, without having a clear objective of what you want to do. Otherwise, obviously, you'll be rumbling all over the place. So let me briefly show you the need for it. So it helps set required expectations. Required expectations both for the teacher as well as for the students. If you have stated your objectives, then there is an expectation. What are you supposed to complete? What are you to finish? What is expected from the students? What do they need to learn? What do they need to be able to do at the end of it? So it says the objectives. Like for this class, the expectation is you will list the three components of an objective. You will write an objective. You will explain why an objective is needed. The expectation is clear. By the end of it, you should be able to do it, and I should be able to teach that. It guides content in the curriculum development. When you have an objectives, you will know what kind of content to put into it. So you won't be stuffing everything in it. So the objective helps you decide what kind of content to include in it. It guides the teacher in the selection of methods and materials. So if you have an objective, then you'll be asking yourself, how do I teach it? If I am to achieve that objective, what's the best way for me to teach it? That means it determines the way you will teach it, and then it also determines what kind of materials you'll need. What kind of resources shall I use to be able to do this? So in order for me to achieve my objectives, what kind of materials will be good for me to use? The fourth one is it provides basis for evaluation. If you have an objective set, then you will also be able to evaluate it in light of the objectives. Okay, this is where I was heading. Did I reach there? Did I accomplish that? Fifth, it emphasizes major points and reduces non-essential materials. This is for the teacher as well as for the students. You know, these days we have so much knowledge out there. You go Google on this one, you'll find lots and lots of information on objectives. But you can't be teaching all of that. So you can decide which is most essential, which is less essential. But for the students as well. I may be speaking a lot of things in a class, a teacher may speak a lot of things, but you can't write all the things that the teacher is saying or even pay attention to everything. I mean, if the teacher is speaking, You should pay attention, but the point is not all the things that are raised in the classroom are necessarily most essential. So you'll be able to decide what is essential, what is non-essential, based on what? Based on the objectives. Because everything that happens in the classroom is geared towards achieving that objective. And therefore, when you're taking notes, you'll be taking notes in light of the objectives. So you'll focus on the essential ones. It simplifies note taking and cue the students to emphasize major points. Similar idea. It doesn't only help you to identify the essential and non-essential, but it also helps you to determine as a student which part of it do I take notes. You know, one of the weakness that we have in our context here is the ability to write notes, to take notes. Sometimes I go around and look at students' papers and the notes that they take. And you can't make the heads and tails of the notes because they would scribble something there, they will scribble something down here, something there. And you can't, and I'm sure even the students, for the most part, will not make sense of it. Or the student will just sit and look at you. Or the student will try to write everything that you say. Now, it's a skill that we need to learn to develop. But having an objective also helps the students. If you have a clear objective, then the notes that students take will be in light of those objectives that you have. So they don't have to write everything. It assists the students in organizing and studying content material. When you study as a student, the objectives also help you because you don't have to memorize everything, but it will be in light of the objectives that was set for the course. So it helps with that. Guide students to what is expected from them and help them to study important information, assist the students in studying more efficiently. So even in preparation for exams, it helps you with it. Because again, you don't have to be memorizing the whole thing, but it helps, it gives the students a guide in the way they study, in the way they prepare for exams as well. That's my last point as well, because it's related with your objectives will be the ones that will be assessed in your exams. So when you set an exam, your exams will be set in light of the objectives that you have because that's what you want to evaluate. And examination is a way of evaluating whether the students have attained and achieved what you were intended, what you had intended for the class. Okay, so those are the benefits of it. I'm sure you can think of many others as well. I'm sure most of you know SMART. So we say your objectives have to be SMART. S standing for specific. It should state specifically what is it that you want the students to do. It shouldn't be so broad that you can't achieve it, not necessarily achieve it, but students can't even understand what it is. So it has to be very specific. It has to be measurable. One of the reasons for having an objective is to evaluate. Evaluating is measuring. You should be able to measure it. You should be able to know if the students have achieved what you want or not. A is applicable. Learning outcomes should emphasize ways in which the learner is likely to use the knowledge or skills gained. Is that objective something that can be applicable? Or I would even say attainable is a better term. Attainable. Can it be attained? Can it be attained? Will it be able to be done? Can the students actually attain it? Can the students do it? Realistic. Is it? Can it be done within the time frame that you have? Can it be done within the capacity of the students? Is it a realistic expectation? So sometimes we set an objective, but then you look at the students, the capacity of the students, and you say, this is just not realistic. It can't be done. It can't be attained. Okay. So you look at realistic. Is it a realistic one? Is it a realistic objective? And finally, time bound. Within what time frame do you want the students to be able to demonstrate the objective that you stated? Okay, so SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. Three component parts of an objective. This one is what I was talking to us about at the beginning of it. So an objective has three components. It has performance, condition, and standard. Performance, condition, and standard. I'll come to it briefly after I talk about the Bloom's taxonomy, which we have spoke about sometime before, I think, but Bloom's taxonomy. So as you can see, they say this is based on a cognitive learning, levels of cognitive learning. So we can have learning at different levels. As you can see, the first level here, we see the knowledge level here. Okay, you can teach students at the knowledge level, recall at the knowledge level, where you will, all you ask here is for students to just remember, memorize something and be able to give it back to you. Okay, so if I say what are the three components, I will list. That's just knowledge level. I'm not required to think, to analyze anything. I'm just supposed to be giving it to you. That's the first level. The second level is the comprehension level. Now this goes a bit higher. Knowledge is just giving back. What are the names of the 12 disciples? But the second one is comprehension. This requires a little bit of understanding. It requires comprehension. That means you should be able to explain something. It's not just giving the names, but you explain those ones. So it becomes a higher level. So the recommendation is that we don't teach only on memory level, where they just give you back something, but you want to go a little bit higher, where they also are able to explain. That means they have understood what you were teaching and now they can explain it to you again. The third level is where we want the students to apply it. Okay, so you don't want them to just memorize something, and you don't want them to just understand it and be able to explain it, but you would like to take them a little bit higher, where they will be able to apply it. Okay, so application. And then those other ones up there are higher level. So analysis is they are able to analyze the concept, they are able to compare, contrast, they are able to break it into piece apart, and they can analyze it. Okay, this requires a much higher level of learning. And then you have, okay, so we looked at analysis. I'll give us example from the Good Samaritan in a minute. And then the fifth level is what they call synthesis. Synthesis is based on what they have learned. Now they can generate something new. Okay, you have taught them something and they are excited about it, they have grasped it, they have understood it. Now they can take that and apply to something new, and they can generate something new. Usually something like people who do research, they come up with something new. When they do research on the basis of studies, literatures that have already been done, and based on that, they will come up with a new idea. But that happens within the classroom as well. So finally is evaluation. Evaluation is the skill to be able to judge. So judging doesn't just happen. It requires you to have the skills of analysis. Now nowadays, most of the time they have switched synthesis and evaluation. Synthesis is put usually on the top, evaluation becomes lower. So Bloom, when he did it this way, but educators are suggesting that synthesis should be on top and evaluation lower, because synthesis, to be able to generate something new, is a highest level. But judgment, evaluation is the level of a higher level of learning. So the idea is we want to teach our students not just at the lower level of knowledge where they just memorize things, but we want to teach them a little bit higher. So you want to go to the level where they can explain it, and then not just stop there, but go a bit higher where they are able to apply. So for us, we should be able to at least when we teach, whatever context you're teaching in, we would like to be able to teach at that level of where they know it, explain it, but also be able to apply it. If you can go higher and you've given them the skills to be able to do it, that's great. Now, note this: your objectives determine the way you teach. your objectives will also determine what content they will learn and how much performance you want them to do. So you remember the performance, the verbs that you choose. The verbs will determine at what level you will teach. So if you say they will identify, when the more they will list, then you are teaching at the knowledge level. So if your objective is stated with saying list, then you've automatically decided what you will be teaching. The students, what will be expected from them is just to list. But if your objective says the students will explain, that requires a higher level of learning. That means you're not content with just them listing, but you want them to explain it, so it goes higher. If your objective says by the end of class the students will, and if you have a performance that requires them to apply what they have learned, then you are going to be teaching them at a higher level. So the point is, the objective you write will determine at what level you'll be teaching on Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, in writing objectives, the action verb is the most important element and can never be omitted, like list, explain, write. Okay, those are the action verbs. Without the action verbs, you don't have an objective. Okay, the action verb states precisely what the student will do following the instruction. Now, let me give us the examples based on the Good Samaritan. Okay, so knowledge level. For a knowledge level, change my thing again. So for knowledge level, I have already explained these things for us, so I don't need to explain. Okay, let me go to the examples. Okay, I have just explained this ones as well, and I have explained this ones. Okay, what they are, what synthesis is, what evaluation is. So now let's go to the example here. For the knowledge level, let me put it as a question here. So, who left a man lying half dead on the edge of the road? Who left a man lying half dead on the edge of the road? All this requires is knowledge. Okay, who did? The thieves. Okay, so if we know the story, the thieves came, they beat up the man, and they left him on the edge of the road. They left him dying there. So the thief, all I need to say is the thief. If I go a higher level, I don't want them to just know who left the person half dead, but I can go to a higher level of comprehension. Why did the priest and the Levites pass by the other side? Now this requires an explanation. So the thieves had beat up this guy and left him half dead. He's a Jewish man, by the way, half dead, and the Levites come and the priests come. What do? They crossed over for a particular reason. Now you are asking the students to be able to explain, so they need to understand the cultural thing, the religious issues that's going on there that caused the Levite and the priest to cross over. So this level of teaching objective is requiring the students to be able to explain. So that's a comprehension level. A third level is the application. So who are your enemies at school or in your neighborhood? Now you're bringing it to yourself. Okay, they're not just telling you who left that person there or why did those ones pass, but now the student is supposed to be bringing it to himself. And who are your enemies in the school? Who are my enemies? Okay, so for the Samaritans and the Jews, they were enemies. So, but the Good Samaritan, was doing good for the Jew, for the enemy. So what does it mean to you? Who is your enemy that you have to be doing good to? Okay. Then the fourth level is analysis. What is the connection between the actions of the Good Samaritan? Now it's analysis. What is the connection between the actions of the Good Samaritan and the ethos of Jesus' own life? So this one is going to analyze that of the actions of the Good Samaritan with that of the Lord Jesus Christ. So this is a contrast level. Fifth one is synthesis. What is the relationship between word and deed in Christian witness? So now, based on the things that was learned, they will come up with something new, and that is a relationship between word and actions. Because the Levites, the priests, they speak, they talk about love and all of those things. When it comes to action, they cross the road and go. So there's disconnect there. So now the students have to generate a new idea based on the teaching of the Good Samaritan to the idea of, okay, loving your enemies could have been the idea in the Good Samaritan. But here they come up with a new one, our word and our actions, how they should be related. And finally, why do you think that Jesus Christ sets loving enemies as one of the chief marks of a true disciple of his? Now, this is an evaluation part of it. Why is it? Why do you think Jesus has said loving your enemy is a significant part of being a disciple? Okay, so this will be an evaluation based on their reading, based on their understanding of scripture. They will have to be evaluating what Jesus has said and its value there. Okay, so writing objectives, we said it has three components to it. So it has condition, performance, and criteria or standard. Condition, performance, and criteria. Condition, what it is it describes the relevant factors associated with the desired performance. For example, condition is when is it that you want the students to be able to perform whatever you want them to do? When do you want them to do that? So you can say, like in my objective I gave you, by the end of the class. That's the condition. So condition is under what circumstances do you want the students to do the performance that you want them to do? So under what circumstance do I want you to list the three components of the objective by the end of the class? That's the condition. Okay. So after attending a lecture, following a review of a demonstration, given a case study, after completing the assignment, all of these ones could be conditions. Performance is the activity the students are expected to exhibit under the stated conditions. Okay, what is it that the students are expected to do? That's your performance. The students will list, the students will explain, the students will compare, the students will write. These are, so list, explain, compare. These are the performance verbs. These are the verbs. And these verbs are very important. Like I said, these verbs will also determine at what level of Bloom's taxonomy you'll be teaching. Criteria, this is the acceptable level of achievement desired. What makes that objective acceptable? What makes their performance acceptable? So you need to put a little bit of a marker there to determine, did they perform to the level that you want? For example, in the example I gave us, by the end of class, the students will list the three components of an objective. The three components is the criteria. That means it's not acceptable if you are able to list only two of them. That's what it means. If you give me, okay, the components of an objective is, and you say condition, criteria, but you leave out performance, then that won't be acceptable, because what I want you to do is I want you to be able to give me all three of them. So you need to include in your objective as much as possible, as clear as possible, the criteria that will make that performance acceptable. So example here is, you can say percent of correct responses. Okay, at the end of the class, at the end of the exam, the students should have answered 60% of this. Okay, so you can give the criteria in percentage. They should be able to complete within a given period of time. They should demonstrate this within 15 minutes. They should be able to, like maximum corner, skills corner, they should be able to do that within 3 minutes. They should complete. So that's a possible criteria. In compliance with criteria presented by the faculty. So if there is a faculty criteria that's already set, that one. Like the third objective that I had, by the end of class, the students would write a learning objective. Write is the performance, but what kind of objective do I want them to write? I want them to write an objective that has all three components of an objective. So the fact that says all three components of an objective becomes your criteria for it. Okay, the order of tenses, usually when you write your objectives, the first part of it will be the condition, generally, condition followed by performance, and it will be finished with the criteria. So that's usually the order of the tenses that you have. Now, there are some verbs that are non-functional. You should avoid using in writing objectives. These are verbs that are senseless. They don't make much sense. Let me, for example, shows interest in. Shows interest in is not a measurable thing. It doesn't make sense. He will show interest. You can't measure it. Therefore, that becomes he becomes aware of. Again, he learns. You can't be measuring that. Okay. He learns, he becomes conscious of, appreciates, knowledge of, comprehend, understands, knows. All these are verbs that cannot be measurable. Okay, so usually you'll try to avoid these ones and replace them with more tangible, specific, measurable verbs. So instead of saying by the end of class he knows how to write a learning objective, by the end of class the students will know how to write learning objective, instead of saying that, if you say by the end of class the students will write, so he knows, instead of saying he knows, if you say he will write, then that can be more demonstrable. It can be demonstrable instead of he will know, okay, or they will know, they will understand. Instead of saying they will understand, make it to be demonstrated in a certain way. So come up with an action verb that allows them to demonstrate. So these ones, they all become non-functional verbs that you want to avoid. Okay, this is something that I would like you to write on the platform, and I'll put a question of it on the platform. So I want you to write, to be able to write. So by now you should be able to explain the need for a learning objective. You should be able to list for me the three component parts of an objective. And with this exercise, I would like you to be able to demonstrate that you can actually write a learning objective. So with this, you will also be writing later on in your lesson plan. Excuse me. In your lesson plan, you will write objectives there. But I will put this one up on the platform. So please visit the platform and make sure you give me at least one objective. If you can give me more than one objective, and at least on the three levels, on the knowledge, comprehension, and application, I'll say yeah. Okay, so I look forward to reading those ones from you. Okay, bless you, and I finish here.